I'm 81 years old. I ran a hardware store on the corner of Vine and 3rd for 40 years, and I buried a wife I loved for 51 of them. And somewhere in all that time, I picked up an idea about love that turned out to be dead wrong. My son visits me once a year. Once. He drives 4 hours, sits in my kitchen for an afternoon, and drives home. For a long time, I told people he was busy. I told myself the same thing, over and over, like a prayer I didn't believe. You probably think you already know why a grown son only sees his father once a year. I thought I knew too. I was certain of it for almost a decade. I was wrong. What finally showed me the truth took me 81 years and one quiet Tuesday afternoon to understand, and I'm going to tell you exactly what it was. There's a chair on my porch. Wicker, falling apart at the left arm, the kind of chair nobody should still be sitting in after 20 years of weather. That's where I wait for him. Every year, same week in October, I'm out there an hour before he's due, watching the road like it owes me something. My neighbor Walt used to needle me about it. "He's coming whether you're out there or not, you old fool." I'd tell him I just like the air. That was a lie. I was counting cars. Every sedan that slowed near my mailbox put my heart up in my throat for half a second before it kept going. People ask how often my son visits, and I've gotten good at the answer that doesn't invite follow-up questions. Oh, he's got a lot going on. Big job, 2 kids, you know how it is. I'd say it light, almost cheerful, like I'd made my peace with it. Most folks nodded and let it go. You ever do that? Build yourself a sentence so smooth and reasonable that even you start believing it, even though some other part of you is sitting in a different room entirely, arms crossed, refusing to buy a word of it? I ran that hardware store for 40 decades, sold lumber and nails and good advice to half this town. I built a reputation on showing up. Early, on time, every single morning the doors were supposed to open. So when it came to my own son, I measured love the only way I knew how to measure anything. With my hands, with my eyes, with a body standing in front of me. Anything less felt like a special order that never got picked up. Last October, when Daniel finally pulled into the driveway, I handed him his late mother's old toolbox before he had even gotten his coat off. Didn't say much. Just put it in his hands and went back inside. He stood there a minute holding it, and I remember thinking even then, that's not enough time for what just happened between us. 90 minutes a year was never going to be enough room for a toolbox like that. Because underneath that smooth sentence was something I never said out loud. I used to believe if you loved someone, you showed up. Plain as that. Love had to have 4 wheels and a front door. It had to arrive physically in front of you, or it didn't fully count. By that math, my son loved me about 1 day a year. A man can talk himself into almost anything if the alternative is too lonely to sit with. The Sundays were where the real shape of it lived, though, not the Octobers. Daniel calls every Sunday at 6. Has for 11 years. Doesn't matter if he's traveling, sick, fighting with his wife, the phone rings at 6. I used to think of those calls as the consolation prize, the thing you settle for when the real visit isn't coming. I'd sit at the kitchen table after we hung up some weeks and just stay there. Not crying exactly, just sitting in the particular quiet a house gets when a conversation ends and nobody else is in the building to hear the silence land. Marion used to be the one who filled that quiet. She'd been gone 6 years by the time I'm telling you about, and the kitchen never did learn how to be quiet the right way. She used to say I had a talent for keeping score without ever writing the numbers down. She was right, and I hated that she was right, and I never told her so while she was alive to hear it. Some lessons you only get to learn from a person after they're gone, which feels like a cruel way to run things. But nobody asked me how to design it. I started keeping a little ledger in my head, if I'm honest. Not on paper. In my chest, where men my age keep the things we're ashamed to write down. Every Sunday call was a point in his favor. Every missed Thanksgiving, every birthday he sent a card instead of a body was a point against. I was building a case. I didn't call it that, but that's what a grudge is. a case you build slowly enough that you can pretend it isn't one. The part that stung worst wasn't even about me, it was the grandkids. Tommy and his sister grew 3 inches a year on the other end of a phone line, and I missed every one of those inches in person. I'd see them in October, looking like different children than the ones from the photos Daniel sent me in March, and something about that always landed in my chest like a small, private theft. I didn't say that part out loud either. I was getting good at not saying things. There was a particular October, his 32nd birthday, that I want to tell you about, because it's the one that cracked something open in me, even though it would take 3 more years before I understood what had actually cracked. He didn't come. First time he'd missed October in 9 years. Called instead, apologetic, something about a work deadline that genuinely sounded real. I said it was fine. I said it in that same smooth, reasonable voice I'd built for exactly this purpose. Then I hung up the phone and threw it. Not hard, it bounced off the couch cushion and skittered onto the rug completely undamaged, which somehow made the whole thing more embarrassing. I stood in my own living room at 78 years old, breathing hard over a phone that wouldn't even give me the satisfaction of breaking. I called him back 20 minutes later and said some things I'd been carrying for 9 years. About showing up, about what a father deserves, about how his mother would be ashamed, which I want you to understand was the cruelest thing I had in my arsenal, and I used it anyway. He went quiet on the line for a long time. Then he said, "Okay, Dad," and that was it. Short. Done. The visit he finally made, 6 weeks later, lasted 90 minutes, shortest yet. We talked about the Pirates' bullpen and nothing else that mattered. He left before dinner. I told myself I'd won something. I'd gotten my apology visit, my proof. I didn't understand yet that I'd actually just taught him something, that coming home cost more than I was letting on, and now I'd shown him exactly how much more. I remember he didn't sit in his usual chair that day. He stood by the window the whole 90 minutes, like a man keeping one eye on the exit. I noticed it then and filed it away under something else entirely. Guilt, I figured, the good kind, the kind that proves a person knows they were wrong. It would be years before I understood I'd read the whole scene backward. It would be 3 more years before I found out what was really happening on the other end of those Sunday calls, and when I did, it didn't feel like winning anything at all. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, not a holiday, nothing special about the date. My grandson Tommy was staying with me for a week while his school was on break. He's 14, all elbows and silence the way 14-year-olds are. We were going through a box in the hall closet looking for an old fishing reel I'd promised him, and instead we found a manila envelope full of photographs of Marion. Tommy got quiet looking at them. Then he said, like it was nothing, like it was a fact everybody already knew, "Dad can't really do this room for long, he told me once. Says it still smells like her in here, even though it doesn't anymore." I asked him what he meant. He shrugged the way kids do when they've said something they didn't realize was a secret. Said his dad gets quiet for a day or two after every visit. Said one time, 2 years back, Daniel sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before he could make himself walk up to the porch, and Tommy had been in the back seat the whole time pretending to be asleep so his father wouldn't feel watched. I sat with that for a long while after Tommy went to bed. Here's the thing I'd never once considered, not in 9 years of building my quiet ledger. My son wasn't avoiding me, he was managing something. The Sunday calls weren't the consolation prize. They were the version of love he could survive giving. Voice only, no walls, no kitchen table where his mother used to sit, no smell that catches a man in the chest before he's braced for it. The October visit wasn't the minimum he could get away with. It was the maximum he could afford. I got up that night and walked through the whole house with the lights off, room by room, the way you do when you're 78 and can't sleep and need your legs to carry the thinking your head can't do sitting still. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a long time. I tried to see it the way Daniel must see it, not as the room where his mother made Sunday gravy, but as the room where she stopped breathing in front of him on a Tuesday morning 2 days before her 68th birthday, while he held her hand and I was at the pharmacy getting medicine that arrived too late to matter. I'd forgotten he was the one who'd been in that room, not me, him. I'd had it backwards the whole time. I thought scarcity meant absence of love. It actually meant a man pacing himself through grief so carefully, so deliberately, that he could keep showing up at all, instead of doing what would have been so much easier, which was simply stopping. I want to tell you about my friend, Walt, because his story sits right next to mine and showed you something I couldn't see on my own. Walt's son Gregory lives 20 minutes away and comes by most Sundays, sometimes more. From the outside, Walt is the lucky one. I used to think so myself, sitting on my porch doing my October math. But I've had dinner at Walt's table more times than I can count, and I've watched Gregory sit there with his phone in his hand, half present, answering his father in the same 3 words on rotation. Yeah, sure. Okay, Dad. Waltz told me once quietly, after Gregory left early again, that he couldn't remember the last time his son asked him a real question. Not about him, about anything. It's a strange kind of poor, having someone in the room every week and still going hungry. Walt sets 2 plates every Sunday and clears 2 plates every Sunday, and somehow he's lonelier on the Sundays Gregory shows up than the Sundays I spend by myself with nobody coming at all. I didn't understand that until I'd lived next door to it for 15 years. Meanwhile, Daniel, who I see 1 day a year, knows that my knee's been acting up since March, knows I switched my coffee brand because the old one upset my stomach, knows the name of the new pharmacist at the drugstore because I mentioned her once in passing. He carries details about my life that Gregory, with all his Sundays, has never once asked Walt for. Presence isn't the same thing as depth. A man can be in the room and miles away. A man can be 4 hours away and know you better than the neighbor who waters your tomatoes when you're out of town. I needed to see Walt's table to understand my own. So here's where I've landed, and I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm just telling you what 81 years finally taught one stubborn old man. I used to believe love had to have 4 wheels and a front door to count. I don't believe that anymore. Sometimes love shows up by staying away. Sometimes the rarest visit is the most expensive one a person has to give. And the gift isn't the quantity, it's that they keep coming at all, year after year, paying a cost you never bothered to ask about. I called Daniel 2 weeks after that conversation with Tommy. I didn't apologize in so many words, that's not how men my age are built, and he'd have been suspicious of it anyway. I just told him I knew about the driveway. I told him we could sit on the porch next time instead of the kitchen if that was easier. He didn't say much, but his voice changed. Something in it loosened that I hadn't heard in years. This October, he came 2 days early, didn't call ahead to tell me. I looked up from the wicker chair and there was his car, 4 hours sooner than I'd trained myself to expect it. And for 1 second, I didn't even recognize what I was feeling, because it had been so long since hope and relief showed up in the same breath. If you've got someone in your life who loves you on a schedule that doesn't match what you expected, stop counting the visits and start asking what they might be carrying that you've never once asked about. Pick up the phone today, not next Sunday, today, and ask one real question you've never asked before. Not, how are you? A real one. I still sit in that wicker chair every October watching the road, but I'm not counting cars anymore. I'm just glad for the one that comes. If this one landed somewhere in you, send it to someone you've been keeping score with, quietly, without making it a thing. And tell me in the comments what's the real reason behind a goodbye or distance in your own life that you only understood years later. I'd like to know I'm not the only stubborn one.